Okay. Good morning, everyone. Hello. Hopefully you had a good break, you had a coffee, and you continued the debate of the first session. I thought it was a great session, lots to learn, lots to discuss. And I mean, going from the climate change to new towns, I feel like it's quite a hard challenge. So hopefully, I think some of the images that were shown earlier today, I think keeping those in your heads, because a lot of, when we talk about new towns, everybody has a different picture in their head. We know that the communities and the RTPI have done a study showing that the majority of our communities don't have much faith in these new towns that we are discussing at the moment. And I mean, I can't blame them, because a lot of the development we see around the country still is falling short of the ambitions. However, we also know that a lot of work, a lot of good work is happening, and some of our speakers will share that a bit later. Unfortunately, it's not coming out of the ground yet, so we can't really use the real examples to convince the communities that we can do better than what is currently coming out of the ground and is being built. There are lots of smaller examples, case studies, SME developers, great projects, but they're not at scale. So I think we have a challenge in terms of communication and upscaling, in terms of convincing our communities that building at scale is one of the solutions. It's not the only one. So I think for me, the new towns, and they're only one part of the equation, they are a great opportunity to tackle some of the really strategic issues that we are having, to tackle the infrastructure problems, tackle climate change, tackle health, because some of those political, strategic, regulatory issues can't be solved on a kind of piece-by-piece basis. We need really big thinking on that. So to start the session, I thought we'd just go back in time, and these stats come from Robert. So if you want any detail, please don't ask me, ask Robert. But new towns aren't a new thing. You know, every town has started at some point. And while we are now thinking about planning a whole new town, it's very different from the incremental growth that we have seen. But some of our very much well-loved market towns were actually planned as well. They were planned by big landlords. So most of us think of the latest generation of new towns, the Stevenage, the Milton Keynes, but actually that is a different image. Salisbury was a new town at some point. So I think we need to kind of start reframing the vision that we are having and what people think about. But why are we talking about new towns now? Because we have a housing crisis. We have a health crisis. I mean, this statistic makes me sad every single time I see it. We are talking about the next generations. We heard 7 generations. The new towns we're building hopefully will be there for much longer, particularly the infrastructure, the roads, the spaces that we put in. Buildings change a bit more often, but we really have to think long term. We have an infrastructure crisis. We have like areas where we don't have energy, we don't have water. The water that we have is polluted. We don't protect the environment. We don't have health and community facilities. And all of these are linked with what we heard before, the climate crisis. So they're really big issues that the task force have been trying to tackle, that government is trying to tackle, that we are all trying to tackle on a day-to-day, and where we all bang our heads against the wall, try to convince our clients to do better. But I want to also take this point to kind of reflect, and in a way say thanks to the support of the members and all of you in the room. Because, I mean, not only this piece of work from the UDG was referenced in the New Towns Task Force, which is brilliant, but all these issues and many more were points that the UDG was pushing. We talked about strategic urban design. We talked about site allocation. I mean, I remember in Birmingham, we were all standing, you know, on the podium and having a debate with the kind of delegates about site allocation. So for a long time, the UDG, its members, and all of you have been pushing some of the really important points. And when I read the task force report, I know Paul said it doesn't mention urban design, and it doesn't. But I actually felt we were heard. A lot of the points in there are the things we as a group have been saying for a long, long time. And it is still only a recommendation. You know, government might still decide differently. But I think they have listened. They have listened to everybody they talked to. They've proposed solutions and a way forward. Although, as we know, devil is in the detail. So we will need to see what's coming out of it. But generally, I thought it was positive and it was way forward. Just earlier, the UDG had an email from MHCLG saying that the work of the report will now be taken forward by a new towns unit, which is made up of MHCLG and Homes England, and they will lead on the discussion with places and the selected 12 locations about how to take it forward. Each of the new locations has to do a strategic environmental assessment, and this work they're expecting a consultation on that early next year, and then a kind of confirmation of the locations in spring. So that's the timetable they've set themselves. And I'm sure we will all be watching. So, what does the task force report do? Why were they set up? They were supposed to identify locations for new towns and make recommendations on how these might be designed and delivered. So tackling some of the issues that we are very much aware of. They've made 44 recommendations. It's quite a long list. And they've set 10 principles for placemaking. And in terms of the delivery, they've really looked at land assembly, delivery at pace, quality of place, and also infrastructure delivery. So they've looked at all the different elements that can challenge the delivery and the design of these new places. So and I think in that, they've managed to kind of not shy away from the challenges, but actually pointing them out. You know, there was in the last few days since Sunday, there was a lot of hype about this. And everybody, you know, on LinkedIn, like, my town was selected, and your town was selected, and aren't we all great, and we're working on these, and so on and so forth. So the focus is now on these 12 locations. But I think it is really important to say there's lots of other strategic developments going forward. So there's a risk that we can't be just focusing on these 12 and forget about everyone else, because new towns are only one part of the solution. And they have selected places, and I think previously, or when they were set up, we all expected, oh, they just go for like greenfield sites, and there's a new town over there. But they've actually looked at urban locations as well. So they've looked at location where the kind of constraint of housing is really stopping economic growth, because that was their focus, housing, economic growth. They go together. So Cambridge area, kind of Milton Keynes, areas where businesses are and where we don't have enough housing to actually support the businesses. You know, Manchester, Leeds, those kind of locations. Then there are other places where there's growth potential, but it's not yet overheating, which is kind of the Exeter example, for example. And then there are kind of places where the growth would support the kind of city areas and would support new infrastructure, new public transport infrastructure in particular. So there's a real mix in there. Urban, greenfield, absolutely new settlements. They've said that all these locations should have a very distinct identity and character, so identifiable as a new community, even if they're within an urban area. So these are the placemaking principles. I mean, to all of us, they probably make quite a lot of sense. You know, not too many surprises in there. Our speakers will touch on a number of them. The kind of vision-led we were talking about, the density will come up, and I think that is a particular one, particular for the kind of urban designers, architects in this room, where there's a real challenge, because we all know the value of increasing densities, but we also know that there's a whole development sector out there which is very resistant to that. So there needs to be a lot of convincing that needs to be happening. Environmental sustainability, we've just heard about and talked about that as well. Transport connectivity we will hear about. And then a very important point is stewardship, and that is often left for too late. So really bringing that to the front of the design and planning process. They've said other things. So about delivery, I mean, they are really of the view that development corporations are the way forward. That is the preferred model. However, they said there are other models, JVs and so on, but they need to be measured against the benefits of a development corporation. Obviously, we know lots of different types of development corporations. Some have planning power, some own land. So, there are still a lot to figure out. And also, it takes time to set up a development corporation. So, 2 years is ambitious. Often it takes longer. So there is a further delay there. I think also the governance. I think they have acknowledged that you can write all the master plans, all the design codes, all your documents, your principles, everything. But if you don't have the governance and you don't have the structures in place in the client and controlling bodies to push for place quality from the first step to the last, you're going to lose it. And I mean, I've been working on new town strategic developments right from identifying the site allocation process down through delivery. And there are constant challenges on every step on the way, where people are kind of trying to get away from the vision, trying to dumb it down, or there are kind of technical challenges which you weren't aware of. So there needs to be a constant reflection of the vision and a kind of protection of the vision and the ambitions that were set out in the first place. There's also a real tricky point, and that is being acknowledged, about the business cases, and that they set the ambitions and don't kind of skimp, I guess, at the initial hurdle. Because by today's standard, having 10 hectares for ground-mounted PVs might not be viable. But we are talking 30 years. So how can we demonstrate viability in today's context for something that isn't delivered for so long? So I think there is an agreement that there needs to be a new funding model, new ways we need to kind of think about establishing the basis, the ambitions, and funding them. There is an acknowledgement about resources, skills, resources, and the UDG has supported great research on that. So that has been acknowledged, and that there needs to be consistency. We can't be tackling these strategic big projects if our political system kind of moves from one side to the other. Investment, design, delivery, that all needs consistency. And one particular point, which is quite niche, but I really liked, was these areas have been identified now. So now all the developers go like, oh yeah, we stick a planning application in tomorrow. And as soon as that has happened, you have lost the opportunity to create a place. So the task force has advised the government to put in place a control that there is no speculative development in the short term until the plans are in place. Because anyone who has tried to allocate a site or tried to kind of work with the local authorities of finding the best site, before you get to that point, somebody else has put in a planning application somewhere else, and actually the opportunity is gone, and that person isn't contributing to the infrastructure, to the community facilities. So we need a system where we can protect areas, because planning does take time, because we need to take communities with us. But sometimes it takes so long that we have actually lost the opportunity. So that was an overview. I'm sure you have a lot of questions, and some of you might have read the report. But I'm only sharing, so I'm only giving you an introduction. The main show comes now. So we are starting off with Geoff. He is an architect, planner, urban designer. His practice is really looking at doing a lot of research and actually putting that into practice. So that's a really beautiful thing of learning, pushing, and then putting it into practice as well at the right time. I only learned today you were one of the 40 architects under 40. So your kind of like expertise has been awarded. So really look forward to what you've got to say.
Cool. Hi everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction, Katja. I think it was really, really interesting, and I think actually everything you said I thought was so nuanced and so precise, and it makes me feel that in the next 45 minutes or so we can have a real detailed discussion about how to make the most of what is undoubtedly a substantial opportunity, but also a substantial challenge in terms of making some of these new towns and urban extensions work and work to bring enduring quality. So as Katja briefly mentioned, my practice, we do quite a lot of a wide range of work because I'm trained as a planner first and then an architect, which is a slightly strange way of becoming a planner architect. But we work on things from garden communities right down to delivery of individual homes and sort of everything in between. So we're working at Tendring, Colchester borders, which is 8,000 homes around the corner from here. We're looking at a project in Simpson in Huntingdon. We do a lot of brownfield work, and then some of the research, which I'll talk about today, which looks at exploiting densities, and then obviously delivering houses and homes as well, which is a really valuable skill set to bring to this discussion. I think for the studio, these things really operate on a gradient, and we look to for our urban work to be informed by architectural endeavours. Just as our architectural work, we always try to take a strategic approach to it. So it's quite important for kind of innovation, we feel. I was going to start by saying, I'm sure most of you will have seen this diagram by now, but now I know for certain most of you will have seen this slide. It's like really good strategic planning on the sequence of these slides. But Katja's talked about the 12 locations chosen. I just put this up as a sort of reminder. I've broken the first 3 up in the beginning: Thamesford, Cruise Hill, and Leeds South Bank, because the intention is to get those moving in the next 3 years before this parliamentary term is up, which I think is great to hear, but I think it's ambitious, probably putting it lightly. I mean, just for context, Thamesford is a site that we were involved in back in 2018 when I first set up the practice, where we worked with the landowner to kind of secure a strategic allocation. The landowner has since passed away, actually, sadly, but it just indicates the scale of time. We're sort of 7 years later, and now the site has managed to get recognised. It's such an obvious, for anyone who knows the site and works in the Oxcam Arc, it's such an obvious location for a new town. And I think sometimes these things, yes, it's important that they have due process and we consider things, but also sometimes we just need to get moving. And perhaps that site, for me, didn't need a report to come out. It could have been something that we started when the government changed. But here we are, and hopefully we can move forward at pace. But pace is obviously important. It's obviously important in the current moment where just not enough is happening. But we also is quality and enduring quality and legacy, and that's one of the things I'll try and talk about in the next 5-10 minutes. So this is something Katja also remarked. I'm glad she opened with talking about how we've lost faith when it comes to delivering quality at scale, and it's because most of the new places we deliver look like this, where they are sort of modest homes, which is fine, but surrounded in a sea of car parking, in asphalt, with very limited green infrastructure, very limited place to play or to walk, to enjoy. They're really the model is very much predicated on a place where you have your home and you commute to your job for 5 days a week, and this is the first place you move into. And when you can get up the ladder, you move out. And unfortunately, that model doesn't work anymore. Like, people expect more from their places now that we're spending more time in there. We know just how harmful schemes that have so much asphalt are for nature, for biodiversity. And we have to get these sites to deliver more, both for people and communities, but also for their environmental footprint. But too many of our recent endeavours are of this approach. And so, why is this? How can we begin to unpick it? And crucially, how can we begin to unpick it in a way that's viable for what we're going to be looking at in terms of delivery models in the next decade or so? So we've done a lot of research into new towns over the last sort of 70 years or so. And one of the distinctions I think it's really important to make, Katja mentioned the sort of first mark of, Basildon, Harlow, Stevenage. Those were all delivered by the public sector, where we were delivering at scale and at pace in a relatively short period of time. So I was worried that this graph was going to be too small, and then I was relieved when I saw the size of this screen. So hopefully everyone can see this. But this basically maps when new towns were built. So our more recent endeavours, Ebbsfleet, Northstowe, which was the previous image, and then Camborne, mapped, they sit along the bottom to the right because they're the newer places, and then the older towns are sort of on the left-hand side of the screen. And what it demonstrates is that the sort of earlier stages of new towns were much more ambitious in terms of their intended population. So, topping off at Milton Keynes, which has got over 250,000 people. They also, because of that size, they also had the critical mass, the density to support physical infrastructure. Many of them are connected to train stations, but also a plethora of social infrastructure. So, schools, nurseries, shops, local centres, all the things that make a place rather than a housing estate that's poorly connected to anywhere else. And so our sort of more recent projects, like Camborne is a great example for anyone who knows it, have been lower scale in terms of how many homes they're developing, and they have been they've taken much longer to kind of mature. And that makes it really difficult to get social infrastructure moving, social infrastructure in particular. And the reason for that is that most of those projects, they have a completely different delivery model, where we're relying on the private sector to lead, rather than the private sector being part of an ecosystem where the public sector come in and de-risk and allow the private sector to then bring their housing afterwards, once they've sort of set in the groundwork with decontamination or large infrastructure investment. So that fundamental difference in model does create different outcomes. And whether we like it or not, we're probably in a political reality where we're not going to see the investment we saw in the first mark because of the current fiscal state of things. It's we can't change the weather, but we can set our sails accordingly. And I suppose a lot of the work we try to do is, if we're working with the private sector, how can we encourage them to get sort of design outcomes that are better for people and better for environmental sustainability. Katja also touched upon the difference between, she talked about new towns not being a new phenomenon necessarily. And this is a slide we've prepared in the past. Whilst building settlements from scratch is not a new endeavour, the way we plan new towns in the post-war era, specifically the more recent projects, is very different to how they have been planned in the past. In the past, settlements have sprung up around demand, where you have a crossroads, you have some exchange, a market square. Homes then grow around it because there is a need for people to sort of move through a place, stop, and then eventually reside there. The way we plan for new towns, in the last 30 years, one could argue it's the sort of the complete opposite of that. We have discussions about visual impact and will these homes be seen? We don't want to impact on supposed congestion in existing places. We like these new places, because of political pressure, to be planned away from activity, which is the opposite of what you want if you're trying to realise a thriving mixed-use place. And that then in turn means that we're delivering at lower densities where social infrastructure is not viable. So how we unpick that, it's a long argument, and we've got a lot of, as Katja suggested, we've got a lot of winning of that argument to kind of do. So I want to concentrate on three things. There was a lot of recommendations, but I want to concentrate on three in particular. I mean, we could talk about this for the entire day, but the three things is working with the private sector to optimize density, building infrastructure, and by infrastructure I mean physical, social, and environmental as you go along, and then embedding stewardship from the outset. And those are three things that I think could lead to a step change in the quality of this next generation of new towns. So the first is optimizing density, and this part of this reflects on some work we did a few years ago now, actually, from 2022 on behalf of Essex County Council, where Essex is obviously a place outside of London that's having enormous growth, and a lot of it is house builder-led at suburban densities. And we we did quite a lot of analysis on the land take of this form of development. So this is a typical, I won't mention where this is, but you can read the report if it's publicly available. But on a new site of around 250 homes, only 12% of the site is actually given over to housing. About a quarter is given over to the storage and servicing of cars. So when you combine your car parking, your roads, a quarter is given over to that. So more than, and at the same time, a lot of this looks green, but a lot of it is verges that are used to sort of manage visibility displays, and they're not terribly ecologically rich. So it's hugely inefficient in terms of how we're working with greenfield sites. And if you compare that to Goldsmith Street in Norwich, where we've got 28% of the site given over to new housing, and only 5% given over to parking. Now, this is a slightly more brownfield location, but it's not a location that's rich in public transport. We've modified some of the typologies. We've brought things back. We've sort of re-looked at terraced housing, which actually is incredibly dense and still only sits at 2 stories. And because of parking ratios, that's not something we can do with current house builder models. So the report comes up with a series of high-level recommendations. I mean, this was from 2022, and I'd actually, if we had the opportunity to revisit things, I think some of the work we've done since would go back into kind of, nuancing some of this. But there are significant opportunities in slightly reducing car parking ratios, perhaps having more flexible car parking, so you're not relying on 3 car parking places on your plot. Looking at squeezing back-to-back distances, looking at having terraces and different ways of having private amenity space, you can really enhance density and give back more land to nature effectively. But how we deal with cars, it has a direct link with stewardship and how that space is maintained, which is something I'll come on to. For those of you who are familiar with sort of brownfield projects, you'll know that form factor, especially when we're dealing with passive house principles, is like central to our design process, but it's never mentioned on suburban housing schemes. So we build without any, in some instances, the pushes the perverse, where we're still looking to build detached homes because there's a marginal uplift in having 4 external walls. And for operational carbon, it's a disaster. And this is probably where we need more of a stick approach, where there needs to be better policy ambitions, or more ambitious policy targets for improving operational carbon. This is a diagram about how a project we've worked on, where we looked at supplementing. So some of those, if you've been familiar with working with house builders, will know that they have their standard products, and not all of them are optimum, I would say, in terms of quality. So this is a project where we looked at supplementing some standard products with some bespoke housing to kind of increase density and improve placemaking. So getting bespoke types to turn the corner, to complete a vista, to kind of pinch and pull in the way that mimics the way some of our historic places work. And doing things like that can really shift the dial on density without having to ask the house builder to reinvent the way their business model. So just moving very quickly on to the second point about building social and environmental infrastructure as we go along. We've done a lot of work on mixed-use centres and how they may get delivered. I mean, Northstowe is a prime example of somewhere which has got a really bad reputation for, probably a little bit unfairly, for having had 2,000 homes built without a single shop. And a lot of it is because we rely on house builders to deliver this stuff. And the clue is in the name. They build houses, not local centres. You know, the people who have the expertise are more sort of regeneration companies or people who work with more of in partnership with local authorities where we're delivering mixed-use centres. And so historically, a lot of that stuff, the mixed-use stuff, gets left to the end. Well, because the theory goes that, well, we'll need to get some critical mass. We need to build 2,000 homes, and then we can have some shops come forward, or a cafe, or a community centre. And actually, the opposite is true, because the more you build, the more you establish patterns of movement where people are not used to their new neighbourhood providing any facilities. So they're already driving to the big Tesco or Sainsbury's to do their weekly shop. Or, you know, there's no proof of concept. So the longer you leave it, the harder it gets. And so that's where we fall into this conundrum where, again, Camborne is an example, which is famous for the new town that was built that's missing a high street. And so shifting the delivery model to kind of developing infrastructure as you go along is crucial. And as part of that, we need to look at high streets and amenity spaces as infrastructure. There was a time when retail could provide a sort of positive outlook on your balance sheet, but that time sadly has gone. And so actually as developers or corporations looking to build these new places, we have to look at social amenity as infrastructure that in providing it up front sort of secures values later on down the line. And then finally, stewardship. This is, I don't know where this is, it could be anywhere. And sadly, this is like the way most of our new places are built. And this is why we're losing the argument that Katja mentioned about not not being able to demonstrate how inspirational, how all the opportunity for these new places. And so much of this is about local authorities not being able to afford to maintain spaces, like too much space given over to car parking. You know, where we have anything that's green, it has to be mowed within an inch of its life because we don't have any maintenance. And so the model we're seeing now, and this is from Bailey in Chelmsford, I would bet that all of this green landscape is managed by a separate management company. And this is something that is a big challenge moving forward, and actually we don't have all the answers for, but it's almost akin to like a kind of leaseholder obligation where you're paying a service charge to have privately managed space because local authorities can't do it. Until there's a new settlement for local authorities where their budget for managing these things is improved, I'm not sure we're going to have any easy answers, but it has to be something that we're considering in the next phase of this stuff, because relying on local authorities to take hold of everything with their current budgetary constraints is not going to get us the environmental performance that we need. I will leave it there. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. A lot of points there to think about. And I think one of the things, who's going to deliver these towns? As you say, house builders build houses. They're not there to create communities. Yesterday, I was in a conversation where people suggested, well, actually, maybe housing associations, maybe they should take a master developer role because they have a long-term interest also in creating energy-efficient homes for their residents and so on. So I think there's a long way to go to find kind of the perfect answer. And this whole balance between who's looking after the space. I mean, sometimes you end up in very strange conversations that on the later phases of Northstowe, we're having the conversation, we want high quality open space, you know, well looked after, natural, everything we heard today. But the members are saying, well, you can't do that because we want everything adopted because otherwise the houses are not affordable. Exactly. So we are stuck in this world of creating beautiful places that nobody can afford, or rather dull places that, you know, people still can't afford, to be honest. So I think there's a lot to sort out. But our next speaker Clare, if you come next. And Clare will take us back to the garden discussion. She is the Director General from the Royal Horticultural Society. We all know them from the Chelsea Flower Show, but as I've learned, there's so much more what you're doing, so much more interest, working with communities and really focusing on what gardens can do in these new developments and what they are like. And I'm looking forward to the discussion, not the manicured gardens that you were talking about. So England has moved on. Over to Clare.
Thank you. It's really great to be here and listen to those incredibly inspiring talks. And I hope I can kind of introduce just a couple of new words, a word that I haven't heard mentioned all morning. Maybe it was mentioned yesterday. I wasn't here yesterday. And that's the word horticulture. Horticulture and the practice and the profession of how to grow things is actually the thing which is underpinning and has been missing for me from this morning. And it's something, you know, we live in our silos. So maybe me coming here today is, my husband is in urban design, and that's why I'm here. So that's sort of what it takes, I suppose, to bring these silos together. We have to get married. So, as I said, I have the most kind of mad job in the world. I'm the Director General, a ridiculous title, but it basically means the Chief Executive of the Royal Horticultural Society, the RHS, as it's commonly known. We are the UK's largest and probably the world's leading garden charity, and we support the nation's 41 million gardeners. And I'm going to come back to that number. That's a very big number, and the green spaces that they care for. But as you said, you know, perhaps we're best known for the RHS Chelsea Flower Show. And this is really, people may have all different sorts of thoughts about it, but it is the kind of the Oscars, if you like, of the horticulture and garden design of this country. We're really, really good at this stuff in this country. And perhaps not everybody knows this. Every single show garden that is in there, and that's over 60 a year, they are then relocated to their forever homes. So that can be to schools, to hospitals, to respite centres. They've gone into so many different locations across the whole country. And then even this year, if you caught it, the first ever garden for dogs went to, and I was thrilled to go and see it being installed, and is now there at Battersea Dogs Home. So we're even giving our dogs green, good garden spaces rather than what was there before. If you ever came out of the train station there and looked down, what they had before was this great big, huge triangular strip of artificial grass, the thing that is the bane to us all. You may have even visited one of our 5 gardens across the country, or we also have 250 sort of partner gardens. I hope some of you in the audience today are members and have made use of the Horticultural Advice Service. So we respond to over 150,000 inquiries a year for people who find things, are concerned about things, often pests and diseases that they're finding. So we have become, for DEFRA, if you like, that first alert service, because we actually monitor everything that we get, whether it's through emails, through telephone calls, through texts. We monitor everything, and so we can actually begin to see if there are, you know, certain pests or diseases which suddenly are catching hold, and we can alert into DEFRA to say what might be going on and what might need to be investigated. We have an amazing garden magazine, comes out every month. But it's very likely, actually, and I spoke to someone last night, said, no, I'm not a member, but I am one of the 30 million people that visits the RHS website. And I would say it's one of the best websites. You know, so much gardening information out there. But if you really want something from true experts, it's written by our scientific and horticultural staff, so you can trust it and rely on it. Go there for your plant information and your plant inspiration. We're also, I'm going to talk about the word horticulture again, we're the largest qualification provider of horticultural training. We have 2,500 students graduating annually, and they really do offer the kind of industry standard for those entering the profession. We have more people wanting to come in and be apprentices than actually we have places for. So, but then what we seem to have is we haven't, and this is where I think the silos come in, there really isn't a really clear career progression structure, because actually these are the people that should end up working with landscape design companies, working with national highways, you know, all of the dead trees that are littering down the new road developments. And we've been talking to national highways about how to plant, not just how to plant a tree, how to make sure that the tree they plant actually becomes established and grows. That's the big scandal of today. We work with more than 30,000 schools across the country, really encouraging through schools that interaction, that learning about planting, about plants, about nature. We have an active community development programme, and we work, and we're just about to publish the country's first, I'm kind of amazed that it never happened before, survey that we've just done on community gardening across this country, and who does it, how do they do it, and also how do we get more of it into, and it's not the whole answer, but it could be part of the answer to the conversations there's been about that active management of spaces. Really importantly, we have an incredible science team, very much doing practical on-the-ground science, looking at the studying, the preservation of the more than 400,000 cultivated species that we have, plants that we have in this country. This is the great untapped resource. And I do encourage people to think not only of the natives, but also the importance of that mix between natives and cultivars. We need that really rich diversity. We've also led the charge on peat-free growing. How do we make sure? Are you sure in all of your practices you are buying and you are requesting and demanding peat-free plants? We can't say that the importance of nature on one hand and then go digging up peat bogs on the other. But what does all this have to do with urban design? I want to share a few numbers with you. I just mentioned the 41 million people in the UK. This is the people that in the UK that have gardened at least once in the last month. This is a really very big number. We're counting children in that number too. So gardening in this country prevails as one of the most common shared activities in this country. And it is the thing, more than anything else, that connects them to nature through the plants and the wildlife in the garden. And I'm really excited. We're about to publish our first ever State of Gardening report. We've really sort of stolen the idea from the State of Nature report. We've been getting all of the data across a whole range of different aspects of gardening. But we've also been getting some new data, working closely with the company Gentian to map Britain's cultivated landscapes. These are the spaces that are gardened. They include front gardens, back gardens, as well as community gardens and some parkland. And on the screen here is a quick flip of it. You can see that these gardens are really concentrated in our towns and in our cities. They cover an overall area equivalent to London, Tokyo, Shanghai, and Houston put together, or 3.5 times the size of the national nature reserves that we have in this country. And we've been working with organisations such as the British Trust for Ornithology that do this incredible monitoring of species across gardens. And within our gardens are more than 50 million trees and support nearly half of our native animal species, store over 150 million tonnes of carbon. At our own garden, one of our gardens at RHS Wisley, we've recorded more than 1/3 of the UK's native flora. So combined, when it comes to ecology, biodiversity, gardens are this extraordinary untapped resource. And this, I guess, this really rich tapestry of our urban gardens, I think could be viewed as the sort of the biodiversity banks of the future. The diversity of species, both cultivated and native, and that range of habitats means that they are supporting more ecology than our countryside, particularly our cultivated countryside. And of course, as we've heard, beyond biodiversity, every garden, if it's done well, helps slows the flow of rainwater, reduces urban temperatures, helps reduces pollution. We have all the data, of course, on that. But of course, gardens aren't just good for the environment, as we've been saying today. They're really, really good for us. There's now a really strong body of evidence coming out that connecting to nature through gardening has a wealth of benefits, including improved recovery. We've all heard of the Great Mediterranean Diet, but in the world's blue zones, 5 cities famed for the longevity of their population, these are also the places where people routinely live into their 80s and 90s and beyond. And gardening is one of the key factors, which is a common habit of these major cities. On 2 streets in Salford, a number of years ago, the RHS ran with the universities of Sheffield, Westminster and Virginia a study, and this found that those living in urban streets where we added plants to each front garden, the people living in those houses had doubled their healthy cortisol levels after 1 year of the experiment. And that is just putting some green directly outside of their front door. A recent survey by YouGov for our upcoming State of Gardening report found that 75% of gardeners reported that time spent in the garden, actually doing gardening, sitting in a garden, had a positive impact on their mental and physical health. And similarly, 70% of staff at we work with the NHS to create these wellbeing gardens. We have one, this is one at Lewisham Hospital. 70% of NHS staff pictured here reported improved mental health. So I think it's probably no surprise to this audience that our cultivated landscapes, they cover almost 5% of the UK's surface land, support an enormous amount of native flora and fauna, and gardening as a national activity is good for you and good for our health. So, has lots and lots of wins. But as we've seen, kind of what's the problem? Other people said this is the problem. And we know, by 2050, 90% of the UK population will live in the urban areas. Already, 8 million people in the UK don't have access to a private garden. Low-income houses, minority ethnic groups are the least likely to have access to gardens. And this reinforces the health inequalities. People without these spaces have less time to spend less time outdoors, face greater risks of poor mental health, obesity, socialisation, isolation, and so on. And of course, with the government's 1.5 million homes, what guarantee do we have that actually really high-quality garden spaces, not just green infrastructure? I hate the term green infrastructure. It doesn't mean anything. High-quality garden spaces. What guarantee do we have that these will be the spaces that we can have in these developments? And it hasn't been a happy picture. Developments in our towns and cities over the last decades have up to 40% less green space than those built during the 19th and 20th centuries. And here in Ipswich, the Fields in Trust estimate that access to green space, a 10-minute walk away, is likely to face further decline of up to 5% in the next 20 years. The Midlands itself facing decreases of 15% or more, despite obviously the promises we get with government's environmental improvement plans and so on. Yet the demand for gardens hasn't gone away. We recently conducted a survey with Anglian Water and found that buyers placed having a garden above many other amenities like parking or the sizes of their homes. And many of them really willing to pay a premium for a sort of pre-designed, biodiverse and climate-resistant garden. So there's a growing mismatch. People want gardens, whether it's private, whether it's public, they deliver huge benefits. And this is gardens not only that are just to maintain space, but they can be actively involved in, actively getting their hands in the soil, learning how to grow. They deliver huge public benefits, but space to grow, space to actually do gardening is being designed out of our new towns and our urban extensions. Now, we've got lots of great examples of really good, and this is one I really, really like. And it's been developed here in Essex, just up the road, and it's right next to the Beth Chatto's garden. I don't know if you've been to Beth Chatto's garden, absolutely wonderful place. Beth Chatto had, an early pioneer of really understanding plants, came up with the concept of right plant, right place, right purpose. You know, success for her meant designing in that concept of the planting and the space around right from the beginning. And so this is Chatto Woods development, right next door to Beth Chatto Gardens, where they worked together, where horticulturalists at the gardens worked with the neighbouring developers using that right place, right plant principle, and have delivered this incredible rich tapestry of drought-tolerant, zero-watering front gardens. So these will be gardens right there for people. They will be able to garden them themselves, but they know that the plants that has been planted there are the right ones which will survive, they will love them, and they will be able to nurture them and grow them. And early ecology surveys have found 20 times the insect biodiversity here already when compared to the neighbouring estate, which had just been traditionally planted without that in mind. Another really fantastic example for us, some of you might know, this sort of multi-award-winning Marmalade Lane, Cambridge's first eco-housing development, where minimising that kind of environmental impact was prioritised. And here, homes arranged around a kind of central communal space that includes allotment beds, fruit trees, where people, once again, have the opportunity to get their hands in the soil and be part of the garden, not just something they pass through or walk through. So for me, these are the case studies that really show that spaces to grow, where people can actually help do the growing, can be delivered alongside development. And we must find ways, as so many people have said, to sort of put these rare jewels and make sure that they are the norm and not the exception. So how do we make the change? I think perhaps having better conversations. You know, we're just getting into this world of really understanding planning, urban design concepts. We're the horticulturalists. It's not a language we're familiar with. And I keep hearing, as I say, lots of terms where I think, do they mean a garden? Do they mean a tree? You know, really trying to kind of understand and sort of, you know, translate it back into the language, you know, that I'm familiar with in my world. You know, we've been partnering and working with the National Allotment Association, advocating for that space to grow in the Planning and Infrastructure Bill. You know, just 7% of publicly accessible space in the green space in the UK is protected. And, you know, local authorities really need those powers to identify and protect and give communities agencies in terms of what they want to grow and what they will grow in these spaces. As you're probably aware, gardens are not part of biodiversity net gain. So you can have a really amazingly sort of biodiverse garden, but it's not counted as part for a developer of their biodiversity net gain condition. So our science and hort teams have been working with DEFRA to really show how domestic gardens can contribute and what the measurements could be in order for gardens actually to be counted as part of this. And one of the issues has been about the longevity of, you know, maintaining the kind of biodiversity net gain spaces. And our satellite research shows that over a 25-year period, 70% of front and back gardens show no detectable negative change in habitat features. In fact, increases in features such as plants, ponds, hedges, and existing gardens. And so the more we can educate people in terms of how to be a great gardener and bring in different features to their gardens, the more our gardens will contribute to that. We've started working with other organisations. We've just done a nature chapter on the National Model Design Code, asking that community stewardship is championed as a means to provide access to these green public spaces. We're working with Building for a Healthy Life and Homes England to encourage developers to prioritise gardens and garden spaces in developments. You know, we want to think, how can we work with planners, local councillors to really bring in that concept of the importance of cultivation, cultivated landscapes, and horticulture, how you maintain and grow things for long term, for biodiversity, for climate resilience, etc. We're also trying to be bottom-up in this. We're in the early days. We're creating a new homes hub on our website. So if you've got some great examples of practice, do share them with me. I would love us to be able to share. We have 30 million people coming to visit our website every year. We have just done the first ever national survey on community gardening. And so once again, we can begin to talk about what is it people need in order to develop and support community gardens. And we have an idea which you may or may not like, but it's a fun idea, and if you've got thoughts, do come and talk to me around, could we develop something like a garden performance certificate, a bit like you have the energy certificate. So you look at features, and I think some of the features actually were exactly in your slides. You know, look at the key features like soils and surfaces, water, place for nature, place for people, right place, right purpose. So that's it. You can see I'm passionate about gardens, and we want to get into your space. So do come and chat if that's of interest. Thank you very much.
And I think with the kind of the importance of the gardens and also Jazz's conversation, the conversation we're having about creating denser urban environments, how does that sit with the gardens? Often we see in kind of, as densities go up, actually the private garden gets squeezed, but then there's a communal garden. But then we are circling back to this morning about culture. Denmark, Germany, Holland, all slightly more willing to share, and even be like our privacy. So we need to kind of, again, community. Okay, I'm too far away from the microphone. Okay, so again, conversations, we need to talk to people, we need to find that balance in this very complex world we are working in. And the last ingredients is not, but really, really critical ingredients is transport. So Geoff Burrage is a technical director from ITP and Haskoning, transport planner, placemaker, and a while ago he has written a blog of saying why all transport planners should be urban design allies, and I think that says it all. So he's really pushing the placemaking agenda, public transport, getting that in from the start so we can achieve all the other ingredients. So Geoff, over to you.
Thanks, Katja. It's quite bright up here, isn't it? I'm getting flashbacks to karaoke last night. I don't know if anyone else is there. So yeah, I'm going to talk about how we can unlock sites with sustainable transport rather than being an engineering constraint. That's the plan. This slide seems hugely self-indulgent, though. Nobody else has been doing this. Who am I? I won't try and Katja's introduction was really good, so I'll leave that top one off. But I thought everyone in here is an urbanism advocate, but it's probably less common, I suppose, in the transport planning field. I think that's really important in my personal life as well. I am involved in communities and activism and sustainable travel enthusiast. I don't own a car, so I try and put into practice everything I do, but I understand car dependency. The picture at the top there is I was brought up on a farm in southwest Wales. You don't really get much more car dependent than that. That picture at the top is from my parents' house. You can see the neighbour actually on the valley, the far valley over there. That was the urbanism where I was. So grew up with cars. You couldn't get anywhere without a car. Very socially isolating if you didn't have one. And I'm taking that kind of no car experiment even further now by having a child and leaving London. And that picture at the bottom there is me getting him to a camping weekend, limited by the charge in one battery, but you can still do these things. So I think, I probably have a complex relationship with the car, but I'd like to think that I understand the need for them, what you need to do to work with them, but also how the conditions you need to live without them, sort of encouraging. I like to think of, actually I picked it up at a conference, I'm not going to say it's mine, but encouraging climate positive behaviours. So people don't think about it, it's not a radical choice, it's just a thing you do, and how do you bake that in? So I'm going to talk about how we too often get to engineered outcomes, and they're always highway engineered outcomes, and how we can get to more people-focused places. And I'll talk about a couple of specific case studies as well of projects that I've worked on, and then some takeaways at the end there. And I've recently been reading a book called Transport for Humans. Oh, I'm moving it here, not there. Transport for Humans. And there's some really interesting ideas in there. It's not really about development, it's about transport more generally, but I think it works, the transport planning in development, I think. We tend to I don't think we even think of people as cargo. We sort of think of them as numbers. Actually, not even that. PCUs, passenger car units, more than anything else. And there's this discussion around the quantification trap, which is really the fact that we focus in on the wrong things and we get a hell of a lot of data about it. So one thing that's really easy to measure is how many cars there are on the road. So we measure that, not a great deal else. And then the problem you've got then is, well, if you've got all this data, you have to think about what the solution to that very specific problem is. So you put all that data into the wrong tools, because models are really brilliant at putting data in and giving you really precise, always wrong answers at the end of it, but reassuringly wrong to a committee or to colleagues as well, often. So you get to the wrong place, and that's before you even start thinking about, is the development in the right place at all? And transport is just not often enough involved in that conversation. And I think we're probably quite familiar with all the other things I've got on the slide there in terms of the how you that works through. You obsess about highways, where the pinch points, you mitigate those, and then you might think about soft measures, which is the stuff that people live in and would like to do day to day to kind of make the model work rather than create a place. So, I mean, path to placemaking opportunities, it's really vision-led, and it is kind of what this whole slide is saying. It's good that it's in the MPPF now, but really what the MPPF is still doing is saying that the key metric is still highways, really. Vision-led, but it's still really the highways that are the thing you need to worry about. That's the severe impact that you still need to worry about. So there's still more work to do there, but really, let's try and think about people. So the one on the slide there is trying to say, instead of just focusing on traffic, let's focus on who are the people that are going to live here, where do they want to go, and what choices can you give them. I don't think it needs to cost more, it can probably cost less, and there's 2 projects I'm aware of, which I won't mention names, but one, a whole local plan has been pulled because they can't afford the road that the county council wanted them to deliver to underpin it all, and there are other examples where they've started building a road and run out of money, and it's not a link road now, it's just a very expensive road to nowhere. So there are plenty, and I'm sure we've all got plenty of examples of that. It's expensive building roads, and inflation in construction highways is way above the economy in general. So it is cheaper to do it the other way around, but and you can use the similar tools because that's a language people understand, but you just have to do it differently and use it intelligently. We don't usually on large-scale projects get away without using a traffic model. You do need to do it, but let's try and put the things into the model that you want to go into it rather than letting the model do all the heavy lifting. I won't talk on that slide anymore. I'll talk about a couple of case studies now where transport has been both the problem and the solution. I'm going to locate us to Ipswich. Here we all are. Oh, wait a minute. No, I'm not. Yes, there we all are. That's Ipswich. So I'm going to talk about Tendring Colchester borders, garden community. Jazz has mentioned this, and I'm also very conscious that we were working on the public sector side, working to develop the master plan that is now being taken forward by others. I think there might be some people from Clarion here as well, so maybe I'll get some fruit thrown at me as we go through it. I thought we did a good job. We'll see. Maybe we can have a discussion on it. That's where it is. It's just east of Colchester, 7,500 homes, and a broad area of search in the local plan to work with, and lots of constraints. So. There were initially proposals for 3 garden communities, and there were some consistent issues that were identified through the process and through the examination in public around connectivity, particularly rapid transit, but other questions around highway capacity, congestion delay, and also quite ambitious aspirations around mode share. And would that be achieved with the proposals that are on the table? And some reasonably robust cross-examination, not quite an EIP, but on those kind of themes. Only the Tendring Colchester border garden community was carried through then to local plan and allocated site, and we were brought in a team led by Prime Partners with Gillespie's to help develop that master plan. And we had some transport fixes here already. There was a housing infrastructure fund which was funding a link road, and that was fixed, and actually that was moving in a program ahead of our program, which that's not how it should work, but that's where we were with it. And one of the things I wanted to talk about is how there are a number of, like, as we've been touching on, kind of key structuring elements. Topography is definitely one of them there, landscape as well, and I'm very conscious just throwing words around like that, having sat through some of the presentations earlier, but I just say I'm a transport planner, so, you know, don't blame me. So rapid transit was also one of the key structuring elements here too. So to kind of win that argument around mode share, to be able to get people to use it rather than drive, it had to be quicker, it had to be more direct, so it had its own alignment, and it was a structuring principle around which the neighbourhoods within the garden community were then formed. And it formed a wider spine through the development as well, so there was, the vision was to have segregated active travel corridors along it, and to have the centres kind of strung along it as well. So if you're on the rapid transit, if you were walking, cycling, you can just move up here easily. But there's a whole load of other principles and thought gone into everything else that needs to make that work. So in terms of traffic management, you couldn't drive up and down there if you wanted to drive in a car. So you would have to go out of your neighbourhood onto the spine road, or the link road rather, back up and then in again. So a journey that might be sort of 5 minutes, 10 minutes on a walk or cycle might take you at least the same amount of time, if not longer, in the car, as well as other elements around parking. Jazz's work on walkable neighbourhoods and density is great, and we were doing a similar piece on parking, typologies, and connectivity and how you can relate those things, bring down parking standards and think about quality differently, also for Essex County Council, so they're doing some good work there as well. So that master plan's been adopted now. The developer is taking that scheme forward. I'm sure there are a few people in the room working on that at the moment, and hopefully some of the elements there kind of bake in that mode share ambition, but the context is still really challenging. The site itself has to work really hard because Colchester is a historic town. There are lots of issues about how you get from the site to Colchester. So still plenty of issues for the team there to work through. The next one is, they're going to talk about the Growing Baldock project. This is an urban extension in Hertfordshire. There's Ipswich. Look, there we are. And that's what the scheme is. And yeah, you can sort of see the scale of it here. You can see the allocated land around the town itself. It is doubling the size of the town, but there's a lot of positive going for the sites here. It's right on a train station. Baldock itself is a really beautiful historic town with a centre. Well, I would say it's thriving. Residents have different views on it, but I think there's a lot to work with there. It's really positive, which you don't always get, but there are a lot of challenges as well. So the centre of the town, who was it? I think it was Jazz was showing, a lot of these towns build up around crossroads, and that's the same with Baldock. You've got the A507 running through the middle of it. It's not easy to think of how you might get around that, and they built a link road to the south of the town some years ago, and the local plan required a link road in some form, or words to that effect. So the previous application provided that link road, essentially. The drawing on screen is showing that kind of bypassing around the town, but transport was a big part of the issue there. The vehicle trip generation was too high, insufficient consideration given to active travel, bus and rail. That's the county and the National Highways view, and there are also issues with the highway mitigations themselves in terms of deliverability. And you can see on the master plan here, I'm really conscious, and I'm sorry if there's anyone in the room that worked on this, but you can see these sort of roundabouts from space. And another concern was, it's creating severance within the new community, drawing traffic through, and a lot of the modelling work was showing that would be the case. It would draw traffic through. So the planning application was withdrawn, and a new team was brought on to think about it differently, and it's been a really exciting project, a great opportunity to really think about how do you embed vision-led with a no site is a blank piece of paper, obviously, but how do you think about it differently to really embed the great things you've got there, like I say, the station, the town centre. So we did a lot of work trying to understand how people move through the town as it is, and found some really interesting statistics there. So 50% of people, just focusing on people of drive, 50% of people going through the town don't stop there at all. They're just passing through the town. There's no benefit to the town whatsoever. So we thought, well, how can you deal with this? This is an opportunity. If you can get rid of a lot of that traffic, you're creating some headroom to do things differently. And that was what our focus was. So instead of providing a link road through the site, and we went through an optioneering process with the county and with the district to get to the point of actually not providing a link road and actually focusing more on how you reallocate space within the town, actually making it harder to drive through the town and in some cases impossible on certain routes. And that does have an impact on capacity. So this is where the modelling comes in. We need to build our case, but we're able to make a case also for lower trip generation by car, as well as all the stuff we're doing on site. And I should say as well, David Locke Associates were leading on this. These are their drawings. So, it's also a good example of having a team that's all pulling in the same direction, means you can get to different places. And we had to confront those challenges head on of trying to sell that to the town in the last public engagement. I spent about 10 minutes being shouted at by a resident calling me an eco-Nazi. So you can't win everyone over. And then finishing by saying, I bet you vote Labour. I don't know what I was most insulted about, really. But you have difficult conversations because you're doing things in a different way. But I think where we've got to is a place-focused master plan, well-mannered junctions. A lot of work has gone in between us and DLA and the client to think about, well, how do you actually make proper kind of, I don't want to use the term gateways into a site, but how can you actually have the urban edge kind of coming up to these junctions so that they're places and not just roundabouts. Also bold improvements to the town itself. The key stakeholders are happy, National Highways, well, as happy as you can ever be sure they are at this stage anyway, and the county, and the team is submitting the application this month, so that's why I've got all those fingers crossed bits there at the bottom. So just very finally, a colleague of mine pulled this together as a bit of a joke, that picture on the right. I think the co-pilot search was find someone who looks a bit like an architect but probably isn't an architect, which I think is perhaps what transport planners should be a bit more like. He seems to be writing his name on the front of the pad there. I don't know what's going on, but anyway, lessons learned. You've got to vision first, what you're actually focusing on, and have that vision within the team, and recognizing transport will be a success or it will be a big failure on the scheme. Have the transport planners around the table early on, I would say that, of course, but front-loading design work and front-loading engagement with stakeholders so you don't get surprises later on. And it means that potentially you spend time designing things, working on things that subsequently you don't use. But as with most things in life, you put the effort in earlier on and things go smoother as you move through that. And I think the key thing for me is we just need to be honest to ourselves. It's not just transport, it's everything. You just don't expect different outcomes if you don't do things differently in the first place. And very heartened that the second principle behind vision in the Newtown Task Force report is around density. And I think that's really critical. Just yesterday in a team meeting where I'm almost Newtown scale, 35 dwellings per hectare average, and I'm sort of trying to make the case that it's difficult to run a bus viably, the centres viably, and that's getting flack from the rest of the team, probably thinking, why is a transport planner talking about density? Just design me a road. But so anyway, we all need to kind of push that as well, I think. And yes, that's everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think we had a quite rounded kind of perspectives, build, form, transport, garden. So I think we have 10 minutes, because you might all be hungry, not sure. But so for questions, and if you come to the front. Are there any questions in the audience? Oh, there's one up in the corner. Oh. Does this? Yeah.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for your talks, also so interesting, and I think just, as you say, just so many interesting points to take from them. I think this one's to Jazz, if that's okay, and it's about stewardship, because I think our biggest, and actually it's actually to everybody, because a great landscape architect said to me, when it comes to stewardship of green spaces, public green spaces, how do you solve the fact that you can't expect people to pay to maintain them when they are publicly accessible for everybody? So you have a private group of people paying for something that is publicly available. Always tricky. And he said, and I said, oh, well, it's cheapest just to mow the lawn. And he said, it's actually not cheapest to mow the lawn. It's the lowest intelligence to mow the lawn. And the best thing you can do is plant intelligently. That requires minimal maintenance. What are your thoughts on the stewardship element of our schemes that we all try to implement?
That's a lot to unpack there, and I certainly won't answer it all on my own. I'd say I think it's, as I hinted in my presentation, that it's a huge challenge, and I think Katja summed it up really well with the point that the conundrum we have at the moment is balancing stewardship with affordability, because we can't get ecologically diverse places managed through public taxation, essentially. So I think part of it has to be about three things, maybe. Number one, designing and planting things much more intelligently, which is something that we heard about. Number two, taking a longer-term approach to how these places are going to be funded. Master developers have very different viability models from your conventional development, and is there a way that we can change the way things are funded to kind of look at green infrastructure as a longer-term investment? And then I think the third is we have to think about it earlier and be much more radical about the way that we're doing these things, because not enough attention, I don't think, is paid on to the link between stewardship and parking. Because for instance, most suburban schemes, they're predicated on having access to a number of cars, and those cars have to be in allocated spaces, and that essentially means that they're on plot. And one of the big ways of improving density, getting better places, is to put a smaller number of cars on street where there's just more natural efficiency. That's the way that most historic places work, where we have terraced housing. And unless we change the stewardship model and the way the management of parked cars works, we're never going to move beyond a sort of model which is 30 dph, where you've got semi-detached houses with 2 car parking spaces on plot. So we do need a reset of that, because it's actually really crucial. Hand over to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really tricky question. I think, first of all, in order to kind of maintain a space, there's a number of things that have to be built in right from the front. So, of course, it's about thinking about the planting and making sure that if you've got understanding your soil, understanding which part of the country you're in, understand if you're here in East Anglia, it's the driest part in the country. If you're up in Manchester, it's one of the wettest places of the country. You've got all of that. But there's also a number of other things that will actually make this stuff much, much easier. Water and watering plants. Probably at some point, even if you're planting for drought tolerance, you may well need to water at some point in time. If you want to do propagation, you may well need to water. How do we make sure we build in, if we're building new developments, water storage, so we're not watering gardens from mains water that's had all of this, done to it for human consumption, because you don't need that level of water. You need, your grey harvested water. So how do you build that in? If you're having a new development, you could do that right from the start, rather than everybody having to have water butts, having to figure out how do you get hoses from one end to another end when when you don't know where to put things. Where do you store your tools in order to do it? So many of these things, which are just simple things, composting as well. You need soil, you need compost. How do you build in right from the start those things that if you're building in a kitchen, you would think of those things automatically? When we're building some of these green spaces, we don't make it easy from the out. So build those things in first. And then there is something, and I suppose people have been hinting at it here. What is that new model? In our gardens, we've got 5 amazing gardens. We obviously hire a lot of really, really trained horticulturalists. They're amazing. They've got extraordinary skills. But actually, we also rely on a huge number of volunteers that come and they say they come because they absolutely love the community sense. They love learning new skills. So is there a new model that you can take from that kind of garden into another? But you have to have that trained professional at the heart of it, then supporting and helping people to grow. So maybe there are some new models that need to be thought of in this realm. But get your basics first right, I would say, underpinning right first, I would say.
Well, may I actually
Yeah. Just a quick one, Amanda, before I come to you. In terms of the training, I think that's a really important point, because we often talk about community land trusts or town councils taking over the stewardship of the open spaces. And I mean, we've seen it in Northstowe. There is a town council, but they are not trained people. They are part of the community, and they are overseeing the development of a whole new town with everything that comes with it. And they're supposed to look after the open space and everything else. So I think there needs to be training going on in terms of supporting the communities to take on the stewardship in the long term. But Amanda.
Hi, Amanda Reynolds, architect and urban designer. If I can take us back to the new towns stroke urban extensions, I'm really pleased that the 3 that are going ahead are actually urban extensions and not plonked on greenfield sites. But there's a huge number of questions. I mean, obviously, how are we going to do 1.5 million even start them off within the term of this Parliament? But I'm involved with the Cruise Hill Chase Park one by virtue of being the chair of the Design Review Panel in Enfield. Therefore, we've looked at this already. And already, most of the land is owned by developers, big ones, small ones, etc. So there is no opportunity for the Development Corp or the local authority to go in and buy up land at agricultural rates. That train has gone, to use a transport metaphor. But chunks of it are quite virgin. There's quite a lot of greyfield, which is great. There's a train station and all that kind of stuff. But there's also chunks of very greenfield land. So my question really is, how do you think we are going to be able to get relatively high density development in these places when we've got the usual suspects lining up to whack in planning applications as soon as the site allocation, as soon as the outline planning is approved for these to be go ahead and be development sites? How are we actually going to get a genuine and local character identity, really? I'm very suspicious of how this can work. Now, I'm going to get an overview of it as it goes on, and it keeps coming back to the design review panel, but we need to start, vision-led, landscape-led, all that kind of stuff. Do you really think that what's coming out of the New Towns paper is going to have enough teeth to actually get this going and keep it in place, and how they're going to do it?
I think it's a difficult one. I don't have any answers, so I'll pass the microphone over pretty quickly. But I think, as with the last question around stewardship, parking, there are business models that it's really hard to, even with progressive clients, to push them on. And there's some heartening stuff in the longer term horizon around combined mayoral authorities and strategic planning and that level of oversight. But if optioned land is there already, it takes a brave government to do something about it. So maybe I'll hand that on to somebody else to answer that bit.
Hi, Amanda. I'm not super familiar with the Enfield site and its particulars, but I would share your reservations about the idea that the private sector are going to come in and go for something uber dense from the first phase. And I think, not speaking to the specifics of that particular site, I think the model, if we're relying on private sector partners to deliver and development corporations just sit in an administrative role, which is what I think they probably are going to do, like rather than sort of going in and building the first phases of homes. I think we have to have a strategy where we build up towards density. That's what we're doing at Colchester, where the first phase is more dense than your average suburban scheme, but it's not as dense as the later phases. And I think that's one of the challenges a lot of sort of earlier, sort of more recent new towns or new settlements have struggled with. They've all been predicated, they've all been master planned on something that's like, 40, 60% flatted development. And then when they get sold to a house builder, they can't sell those homes. And that is also understandable. So I think we need a strategy where the initial phases are a dial shift in terms of density and placemaking, but the strategy recognises that it's not viable to kind of get to where we need to be from the first phase. So I think from a design review panel point of view, maybe it's about having comfort that the first phases are bringing innovation, but perhaps not as much innovation as we'd like to see when the development is mature.
I'm not an expert in this at all, so this is just things that I'm aware of that are different and new and kind of innovative. And one is actually around water and water storage. And so, as I say, rather than building in through innovation right from the beginning, single, big water storage places that then can be used in order, if you have got reduced space, that you've actually got ways to collect and people to use water. The other is balconies. Balcony gardens, if you actually create your balcony so that, and then you provide the ways and the means that those balconies can be turned into gardens, and you give, great education, great opportunity for that to be done. Once again, you're probably familiar with the Cloud Gardener, the chap in Manchester who created this gorgeous garden on the 20th floor of his balcony in Manchester during COVID, and now has this huge following because people are so excited about it. So there are lots of I think we just need to start thinking differently through a number of these things. So I'm certainly not an expert, but I've just seen some wonderful examples of things, and how do these things become the norm rather than just the one-off.
One in the top, and I think then it's probably lunchtime.
Can you make the questions very quick? 8 words max.
Okay, I've got the microphone. I'll be quick, Robert. My question is about politics and decision making, and Jazz, you inspired the question, which is about we need to move away from on-plot parking to on-street parking. But when something goes to planning committee, the people on planning committee typically live in a house that's got 2 on-plot cars and think, well, it works for me. So the question is, how do we get more urban designers, architects, transport engineers to stand for public office and maybe be the decision makers? And if they're reluctant to stand for public office, what can we do to persuade them?
I mean, you probably need quick answers as well, right, Robert? I think a lot of this is probably in training, and I think there are some intelligent ideas about training members and making members that their point of interjection, like channeling it at a certain point in time. So, for instance, their input is probably at site allocation / outline consent stages, and you're not having things go to committee several times and stalled later down the line. So I think the new government, they've got a lot of things wrong, but one of the things that they have got right is the identification that committees with members aren't necessarily the most objective commentators, I guess, and it is a big stalling block. So if we can't get to a place, I think education is important, but also we need to kind of have more strategic consultation, because consultation stops being productive after a point of view time when someone is fundamentally just against the idea of development.
Yeah, just very quickly. I'm on a land use and planning group for the Transport Planning Society, and one of the things we're thinking about is exactly that. There's a certain demographic of councillor. They live in their own little bubble, unconscious bias. How can we make them see that they're seeing the world through a windscreen rather than through other people's lived experience? But yeah, it's a difficult one.
Should we take the remaining questions all in one go?
Okay.
Because we're intruding on lunch now.
Probably do without the mic.
Okay, yeah, just
it's a good question with the Geoff. I'm glad I'm not the only one who's suffering from karaoke last thing to do. But
Right, karaoke, that's an irrelevance. Go for the question.
one thing to ask is, in a way, we're unitary, and so we have highways in North Arctic, which is fantastic. On the other hand, the kind of redistribution of priorities in the sense of the social contract, and you might think about that, and therefore money, what it's aimed at is, I'm not sure the references that the highways are using are necessarily the progressive ones, and I'm wondering, where are those references, Geoff? Where would we point them to say, look at this is the redistribution we start to need?
hold that question. Yeah, lady in the white.
If you shout out, let's.
I'll be very quick. Why are we not building more co-housing in this country? Because it seems like a lot of the issues that was addressed in first two presentations seems like would be a good solution to these issues. So if you agree, why do you think this country we don't see more co-housing schemes?
Hello, I'm Yogesh, urban designer. I'm probably going to get instructed by a volume house builder next week on their site, suburban site in Essex next week. I'm struggling to think, how do I actually implement what you've been talking about today? So how do I, from the start, from the get-go, from the brief, introduce what you've said?
Yeah, I mean, the highways question is a really difficult one. There's too many highway engineers still looking at the design manual for roads and bridges in urban areas. You've got manual for streets and manual for streets too, but it's really old now. And I was involved with the team led with WSP, writing manual for streets 3, when the idea there was that you bring it all together. You're very clear. This is what you need to design to, and we were bringing together lots of great principles about a lot of the stuff you're talking about. But yeah, I don't know, it seems to be in the long grass in the DFT somewhere at the moment, but hopefully with a change of government that might see the light of day soon.
I'm going to address that last question very quickly, which is to get a very good horticulturalist on your team.
And coming back to co-housing, at the moment, the people who are building stuff is a very, very narrow field. So it is probably one of Yogesh's clients and about 6 other companies that are doing the vast majority of building in the UK, because the process is fraught with risk. It's highly financialized. We just don't. It's not a. I mean, there's a sense land tends to favour monopolies, and house building is in monopolies at the moment, and we don't have enough SME builders, and as part of that lack of diversity, we don't have enough co-housing, which to get co-housing moving is risky, and people need money and long-term investment, and that's not available. But I agree, it's a very important part of the solution.
It's the banks won't lend.
Yeah. Amanda says it's the banks won't lend. Exactly, rightly.
Let's give a thanks to the speakers. And